Correct.
Sam, let me ask you a question. Let's move now to Washington, because this is all of these questions and issues are coming about this week. Let's start with the president's budget. You wrote an interesting story about what he decided to cut and his history. Tell us about your take on it.
Well, I mean, it stood out. The three main things that the White House was even publishing or promoting were cuts that all sort of had ties to Obama's personal biography. You had cuts to community service block grants. Obama was a community service organizer in Chicago, obviously. You had cuts to energy assistance for low-income families. Obama worked as a lawyer in these low-income neighborhoods, in part on energy issues. And then you had a refiguration of the student loan policy, which would force people who take out loans to start paying interest on the loans while they're in postgraduate school. Obama, quite famously, just recently paid off his postgraduate loans. This was not a coincidental development. The White House advisors tell me, as well as allies of the White House tell me, that they wanted to show some sort of personal sacrifice. He was leading with his chin, so to speak. The problem, of course, is that you're asking all the poor people to sacrifice, and this is 3 months after or not even, a couple months after extending the Bush tax cuts for the rich, and it's setting up a very weird optics, very awkward narrative for the administration.
It seemed like they chose those areas to show this is a sense of the amount of pain. So if the number is one way you show it, how big are the cuts, that's one way. Another is if it cuts close to the bone.
Yeah.
Andy, let me ask you a question. This wasn't obviously, as is typical and standard, the opposite party declared the president's budget dead on arrival. I want to ask you this question about leadership, which Republicans have said, the president has failed to lead and not talking about anything in terms of entitlements. He's not really embraced the deficit commission. Of course, he spent the last year trying to fight for health care reform that has quite a bit to do with long-term entitlement costs and the deficit picture. So let me ask you as a political question, do you think this leadership rap against the president pays off in the budget fight here, or is it just one of a series of talking points from Republicans?
Well, it's smart for them to set it up like this, but only if they actually come through with something. I mean, they actually have to present, some sort of believable proposal on reducing entitlements. It's one of these things like, Paul Ryan has to step up with a budget that people can believe, that there is a perception that Republicans are trying to come up with something that they think they can at least get some Democrats on board on. Like, it has to be a big adult thing. If they just come out with something that is a very clear political play, this whole setup of leadership really falls flat, because if they're not stepping up and doing their part, the attack on the president just doesn't work.
David, Republicans are trying to show their sense of leadership by talking about what they're going to cut in this year. The budget talk is about what's happening in the future, but they've obviously set a big goal for themselves. Let's take a look at what Speaker Boehner said about who these cuts might affect, and then we'll talk about it.
Over the last 2 years, since President Obama has taken office, the federal government has added 200,000 new federal jobs. If some of those jobs are lost in this, so be it. We're broke. It's time for us to get serious about how we're spending the nation's money.
So be it. Rosa DeLauro was passing around buttons with "so be it" on it in the voting, in this marathon session of voting we've had on the funding of this continuing resolution, funding government after March 4th. So be it. Is that going to be something, obviously Democrats are going to try and hang that around Boehner's neck. The president, when he argued for the stimulus bill, would talk about the number of cops that were being kept on the beat and so forth. What's your sense of the political peril in having said so be it?
In this case, I don't really think there's much. Right now, with unemployment still very high and people unsure about the nation's economy, I don't think there is a lot of sympathy for the federal workforce, for the public workforce in general, because most people feel as though they're under threat. And if they do have a job and want to move, it's very difficult. So I think that if Republicans play this right, you never want to seem as though you're completely uncaring. But if they keep the focus on reducing the size of government, trying to do it in a reasonable way, I think that they can come out on top. Very interestingly, the debate the past couple of weeks has been, how much should we cut? Where in previous years and in eras, it's been about a debate over cutting the rate of growth, where one side said, let it grow, and the other side, let it grow less. And so I think it's a very sort of different picture, and I think what Speaker Boehner is trying to do is deliver something that is significant without going so far as to alienate independent-minded voters.
Well, but he there is a question of whether he threatens to alienate those voters because he has, in addition to saying so be it about jobs, he has also said that he's not going to let a continuing resolution go through that doesn't have real cuts in it, which is being interpreted by Democrats as a sort of shut down the government kind of threat. Now, Democrats are, of course, falling all over themselves to make that charge because of the memories of 1995. What happens, though? They go away for a week. They have to put this all together in the House and the Senate to continue funding government operations in 4 days. I mean, it looks like a disaster.
There's going to be a lot of late nights. I'm brewing coffee. Look, they're going to spend President's Day recess making the case to their constituents. Democrats are going to be telling everybody that if the House Republican budget passes, there are going to be no more cops on the street. And Republicans are going to say, we're trying to reduce the size of government so that all of you without a job can now find a job because we can inject capital back into the private sector. And it's about who wins the argument. I would say this. Members of Congress and leadership always posture at the edges before the negotiation happens. Nobody wants to give away their negotiating point. So I think you bring up a key point. The answer is, are those 4 days enough to get it done? But I wouldn't expect either Majority Leader Reid in the Senate or Speaker Boehner in the House to start singing Kumbaya with each other and giving away their position. They're going to start here so they can end up there.
Sam, you seem itching to jump in here.
I am a little itching. I happen to think that we generally miss the point when we're talking about deficits versus jobs and government jobs at that. I can't imagine that someone who you go up to and say, are you worried about your job or are you worried about what the government is spending is going to say, I'm worried about what the government is spending. They want a job. And government jobs are very hard to distinguish between private sector jobs so long as you are employed. And so if in fact, House Republicans, House Democrats can't settle on this continuing resolution to fund the government, that's going to be a real, pox on both your houses moment for everybody. I mean, they're fed up with government to begin with. If you actually shut down the government, throw all these people out of work because they're dependent on government jobs, I mean, what does that say about the ability of Congress to actually govern?
In the last CBS poll, it showed that people, less than 50% of the people think there's any connection between dealing with the deficit, shrinking the deficit, and the economy and jobs. Yeah. So this message hasn't come through. Andy, let me ask you how you see this. There is both the real chance that government might not be funded, but Republicans, when you talk to them, feel, it seems to me, the same way about the shutdown of government and are as worried about it as President Obama was worried that taxes would go up on everybody at the end of last year. That was always the thing that seemed to sort of sap the leverage from the president, was that he could not have a situation in which taxes would go up for everybody if the Bush tax cuts weren't extended. So what's your feeling about for Republicans? They do not want to have a government shutdown. So don't they lack some leverage here in this tight negotiations we're going to have on this one specific question?
They absolutely do, and it's like the same kind of situation they're facing when you're talking about what they're going to do with the debt ceiling. I mean, they're going to frame the debate in such a way where they're going to have so many of their Tea Party members, people like Palin, weighing in and saying, we need to stand firm to our principles and we can't give an inch. They're just not in a position where they can also make the claim that they're the adults now, that they're stepping in and they're being serious. And so, they're just in a very tough position. Boehner has made it very clear that they don't want to shut down, that they want to avoid that at all costs. And yet he's going to have a tough time kind of keeping like the Allen Wests of the world in that Republican caucus quiet.
Oh, that's a tough job for anyone. David, let me ask you a question about this question of corralling the excitables. One of the ways that the leadership in the House arranged this vote on the various amendments for the continuing resolution was to give everybody a shot, let 1,000 flowers bloom. They've been staying there late at night. One of the things to fall was something that Speaker Boehner wanted to keep, which was this second engine of the F-35, the Joint Strike Fighter. It went down through a coalition of both kind of liberal Democrats and Tea Party Republicans. What have we learned about his ability to control these energetic new members, and is that going to be an even bigger problem than they thought?
Well, I don't think that Speaker Boehner has actually underestimated the ability to control these guys. I think that his strategy has been to allow them to have a say, to actually strategically have an open process, meaning we're not going to see it all the time. We haven't seen it all the time. But with so many new freshmen and with all of the energy they brought from this particular election cycle in this atmosphere, the best thing he could do is to let them have a say on all of these spending measures, let them fall where they may, and then when he needs to have a closed process, when he needs to try and corral them, he'll be able to do it because it'll be a give and take process. And I think a lot of these new members are learning with this sort of round the clock, vote-a-thon, that, okay, maybe we don't want to go through 500 amendments every time we have a bill. And I think it's really the best thing he could have done for moving forward in terms of governing is to open it up a little.
Well, that's right. Leadership had said we're going to let them kind of exhaust themselves and find out that, hey, it's actually a little harder.
The speaker had said while campaigning, I might lose a few, that might be a good thing.
Right.
I agree, and I think it's so, in some respects, Democrats are so silly to like trump it up every time that Boehner has a friction with a Tea Party member. That's bound to happen, and I think it actually does Boehner well in the long run, and it does the Tea Party members well in the long run. They know the lessons of '94, which is that the new class came in, they got co-opted by the old class, and then soon enough they were gone themselves. It's refreshing and it's helpful for them to show that they're not going to just be in line with leadership, that they are going to pick their battles. And yeah, Boehner lost out on the second engine funding, but at least he got to show that he was there for GE and trying to get jobs in his district. So he wins one in that respect, too.
Andy, let me ask you a final question. We've talked a lot about the Hill. Let's bring it back to the president and where he has to pick his shots. He spoke on the question of Wisconsin. As Sam pointed out, you can't not talk about unions if you're a Democratic president, especially one who's got some unions issues to tend with. But one of the design parts of Obama 2.0 was going to be to stay focused. They keep talking about winning the future. He's got events. He's out on the West Coast promoting one of the elements of the winning the future package. And yet he's got, in these budget fights, he's going to have lots of these cases where there's an attempt to defund Planned Parenthood. Well, that's something the president might be asked about and would be tempted to weigh in on, another important constituency, the way unions are an important constituency. There are all kinds of these issues that are going to kind of come up. What's your sense of how he handles the day-to-day of the budget battle? He had a news conference, he had to talk about it this week, and yet at the same time tries to pitch this larger message, which they think in the White House is the new way that he has to do business to sort of stay on message.
Well, it's pretty clear where the priorities are. You just have to look at where he is today, in California meeting, with all these, top Silicon Valley CEOs instead of in Wisconsin. I mean, the fact is they don't want to be talking about the public employee stuff, despite the fact that, this might actually get them energized and might help them this time. Next year when they're trying to ramp up for the presidential campaign. But, the social things, especially, the Planned Parenthood thing, despite the fact that video that the Family Research Council in Pence has been pushing kind of fell flat, it's just not things that they want to be focusing on. It's not part of their message. But they found over and over again that it's just been difficult since the campaign for them to really push any sort of agenda. And so I think they're just going to kind of there's just going to be some give and take here. And it's going to be hard for them on this winning the future message to really put anything forward when they're dealing with so much stuff that they're getting dragged into. And just the nature of how the budget's going to work, that's just what's going to happen.